It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Niccolò Machiavelli. Power resides where men believe it resides. This is the first truth of strategic mastery. The second, a man who cannot control himself will never control others. The third and most vital, in a world of wolves, the untouchable moves among them unseen until the moment of action. These are not philosophical abstractions, but concrete laws governing human interaction. Whether acknowledged or denied, reality does not bend to wishes. It bends to power applied with precision at critical points. Consider Cesare Borgia, Machiavelli's model prince. In 1503, he commanded Italy with an iron grip. By 1507, he was dead in a ditch, betrayed by allies he trusted with his life. They never warned him. They smiled, shook his hand, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. This is not an aberration of history, but its constant refrain. The powerful fall when they forget the nature of power itself. It exists in perception first, reality second. Perception is the battlefield where wars are won before the first blade is drawn. The image of strength matters more than strength itself. The weak telegraph their weakness. They expose their struggles, announce their fears, reveal their limitations. They bleed in public and wonder why wolves circle. The strategic mind operates differently. It presents an unassailable front, regardless of internal condition. Never reveal the extent of your troubles. When challenges mount, when resources dwindle, when allies desert, this is precisely when the display of unshakable confidence becomes your most valuable weapon. Doubt is contagious, so is certainty. Project the latter, even when surrounded by the former. This isn't false bravado, but calculated theater. Humans follow those who appear to know where they are going, especially when no one does. The untouchable understands a fundamental truth. Humans project strength through restraint, not exertion. Observe the differences in a crowded space. The anxious announce themselves with constant motion, fidgeting, explaining, seeking validation through nervous energy. The powerful remain still. They speak less, but with greater impact. They move deliberately. This physical discipline reflects mental discipline. It broadcasts control without saying a word. Strategic silence amplifies power. The more you speak, the more weapons you hand your enemies. Every word creates a point of attack, every explanation a potential weakness. When challenged, the average man rushes to defend himself, to justify his actions, to seek understanding. This instinct surrenders power instantly. The strategic response involves calculated delay. 3 seconds of silence before responding. A question returned instead of an answer given. A lowered voice instead of a raised one. Watch how power shifts when silence is deployed effectively. It forces others to fill the void. It makes them uncomfortable. Discomfort reveals. In their rush to end the silence, people expose intentions, reveal insecurities, offer concessions. Silence is not passive. It is an active probe that tests the mental discipline of others while preserving your own position. Unpredictability functions as both armor and weapon. When opponents cannot anticipate your moves, they must prepare for all possibilities, spreading their resources thin. When they cannot read your thoughts, they project their own fears into the vacuum. This psychological mechanism turns their minds against them. The mysterious figure in power becomes whatever they fear most. Their imagination becomes your weapon. Emotional control determines who holds power in any exchange. Anger, fear, desperation, excitement. All these states represent temporary surrender of rational faculty. The first question in strategic assessment is simple. Who controls their emotional state? Who reacts? Who remains unaffected? The reactive personality will always serve the controlled one. This dynamic transcends physical strength, wealth, and formal authority. Through emotional mastery alone, the weaker can control the stronger. Replace emotional decision-making with strategic calculation. When challenges arise, most ask, "How do I feel? What does my heart say? What would bring immediate relief?" These questions ensure defeat. The Untouchable asks different questions. What does this achieve? How does this advance long-term position? What leverage does this create or surrender? Emotions provide data, but never direction. As Nietzsche observed in his examination of power dynamics, he who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. The Untouchable maintains psychological distance, not just from opponents, but from the struggle itself, preserving clarity when others become consumed by the contest. Machiavelli's most quoted insight remains his most misunderstood. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. The superficial reading suggests cruelty over kindness. The deeper truth reveals that respect rooted in emotional warmth dissolves at the first test. Julius Caesar surrounded himself with those who loved him. Their daggers found his heart on the Senate floor. His dying words, "You too, my child," marked his final lesson in the transactional nature of human loyalty. Understand this: loyalty is rarely pure. It is not an emotional bond, but a calculation of present value and future cost. The moment your usefulness diminishes, emotional loyalties evaporate. This is not cynicism, it is clarity. The Untouchable builds systems that align others' interests with his own, rather than depending on their character. Leverage creates reliability where emotion cannot. When others need what you control, whether resources, access, protection, or opportunity, their behavior becomes predictable. When crossing you carries tangible cost, their loyalty becomes mechanical rather than optional. Systems of incentive operate with greater consistency than systems of affection. Strategic positioning requires 4 elements. First, make yourself necessary to key operations. Become the holder of critical knowledge or skills that cannot be easily replaced. Second, control resources that others require for their success. Third, develop a reputation that makes potential betrayal seem excessively risky. Fourth, cultivate the appearance of independence. Never reveal how much you need any particular person or outcome. When betrayal occurs, and it will, emotional reaction guarantees defeat. The immediate impulse toward visible retaliation reveals weakness, not strength. The strategic response appears counterintuitive. Act unfazed, perhaps even appreciative. This response disorients the betrayer, who expected anger, defense, or immediate counterattack. It preserves your position while you gather intelligence and prepare a measured response. Revenge functions as strategy, not therapy. Its purpose is not emotional satisfaction, but position restoration and future deterrence. Al Capone demonstrated this principle during the Chicago gang wars. When rivals moved against him, he did not respond immediately in visible anger. He established a public alibi in Florida, while his carefully selected team executed a devastating response months after the original offense. He didn't react, he responded. The difference determined the outcome. Strategic timing determines effectiveness more than force applied. The Russians understand this principle in both warfare and politics. They wait. The most devastating strike is rarely the immediate one. It arrives when the opponent believes the danger has passed, when their guard has lowered, when their attention has shifted elsewhere. Patience transforms moderate resources into decisive advantage. Visibility creates vulnerability in direct proportion to its extent. Those who stand in the spotlight cast the longest shadows and present the clearest targets. The misguided pursue fame, credit, and recognition, not understanding These are liabilities in strategic terms. Attention invites scrutiny. Recognition generates envy. Prominence attracts opposition simply because it exists. J. Edgar Hoover held unrivaled power in American politics for decades without holding elected office. His methodology was not complex. He collected secrets, built files, and created an atmosphere of implied consequence without explicit threat. He rarely demonstrated his power directly. The perception alone proved sufficient. His influence operated invisibly, his hand unseen, even as it shaped events. True power functions as atmosphere rather than event. It does not announce itself through demonstration, but establishes itself through implication. The untouchable cultivates influence without visibility, control without credit. He allows others to wear the crown while he controls the kingdom. When attacked, such a figure presents no clear target, only a vacant space where enemies believed power resided. Carl Jung understood that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The untouchable applies this principle strategically. He works to understand the unconscious patterns driving his opponents, while ensuring his own psychological triggers remain unknown to others. The appearance of weakness becomes tactical advantage under specific conditions. Machiavelli noted that the wise man should always seem weak when he is strong, and seem strong when he is weak. This principle exploits human psychology. The opponent who believes you broken, defeated, or harmless relaxes vigilance. Their arrogance grows as their caution diminishes. In this state, they expose vulnerabilities that would never exist if they perceived you as threat. Strategic deception differs from simple lying. It is not denial of reality, but selective presentation of it. The untouchable never flashes strength without purpose. He allows opponents to underestimate capabilities until the moment advantage shifts. When enemies believe victory secured, their guard drops. The opening this creates cannot be purchased at any price, yet it costs nothing but strategic patience. Half measures guarantee future conflict. When confrontation becomes unavoidable, decisive resolution must follow. The opponent left with resources, dignity, and motivation becomes the architect of your future troubles. Your opponent learns your methods while nurturing grievance. This combination ensures return with improved strategy. The strategic resolution removes capacity rather than desire. The vanquished enemy may still hate, but without means to act, this emotion remains irrelevant. This principle applies equally in business competition, political rivalry, and personal conflict. The opponent rendered functionally harmless requires no monitoring. Power does not reside primarily in the individual, but in the environment that individual controls. Direct confrontation creates unnecessary risk, even with superior resources. The superior strategist attacks conditions rather than persons. He isolates opponents from support structures. He alters rules of engagement. He changes the landscape until the opponent's position becomes untenable without specific attack against them. Michel Foucault recognized that power is not an institution and not a structure. Neither is it a certain strength we are endowed with. It is the name that one attributes to a complex strategic situation. The untouchable operates within this understanding, manipulating the strategic situation rather than seeking direct confrontation. Environmental control represents the highest form of strategic positioning. The chess master does not capture the king through direct assault, but by systematically removing options until no viable move remains. Applied broadly, this means controlling information flows, resource access, relationship networks, and opportunity pathways. The opponent finds every direction blocked not by visible barrier, but by subtle redirection of the environment itself. Psychological isolation precedes defeat in most cases. The opponent, separated from allies, validation, and support, begins internal collapse before external pressure intensifies. When a target believes support has evaporated, their resolve weakens. They begin questioning their own judgment. This psychological state creates openings that force would never produce. The untouchable manipulates perception through information control. He releases data points that create desired impressions without explicit statements. He ensures key figures receive specific perspectives through trusted third parties. He creates convergence of separate sources that appear to independently confirm developing narratives. These methods shape reality within the minds of targets without direct fingerprints on the operation. Most strategic failures originate in ego rather than external factors. The desire for recognition, vindication, and visible dominance creates vulnerabilities no opponent could manufacture. The need to be seen as powerful diminishes actual power. The untouchable subordinates ego to objectives. He does not need credit. He measures success by outcomes, not recognition. Personal identity represents strategic vulnerability when overly rigid. The untouchable maintains fluid self-conception, focused on effectiveness rather than consistency. He adapts approach, methodology, and presentation based on environmental requirements rather than personal preference. When conditions demand transformation, he transforms without internal resistance. Strategic thinking requires systematic disentanglement of emotional reaction from tactical assessment. When provoked, threatened, or challenged, the untouchable separates internal response from external action. He experiences normal human emotion, anger, fear, doubt, but prevents these states from determining behavior. This separation creates decision space where others act on impulse. Information asymmetry creates positional leverage in any interaction. The party who knows more about the other holds natural advantage. This principle explains why silence consistently outperforms disclosure. Each statement you make, each reaction you show, each preference you reveal becomes data opponents can leverage against you. The strategic listener gains, while the strategic talker loses. In conversation, negotiation, or conflict, the disciplined approach involves extracting maximum information while revealing minimum position. Ask more than you answer. Listen for what remains unspoken. Note emotional triggers, value indicators, and constraint revelations. Physical presence communicates more effectively than verbal content in most human interactions. The untouchable cultivates deliberate movement, controlled expressions, and commanding stillness. He enters spaces with purpose rather than anxiety. He maintains eye contact without aggression. He stands straight without tension. These nonverbal signals bypass conscious filtering and create direct impression of authority. Voice modulation affects perception more than word selection. Lower, slower speech patterns create impression of authority, independent of content delivered. When others raise volume, the untouchable lowers his. When others accelerate pace, he deliberately slows. When others speak with emotional intensity, he responds with calm precision. Strategic preparation eliminates dependency on inspiration or circumstance. The untouchable does not wait for favorable conditions. He creates them through systematic groundwork, often laid months or years before necessity arises. He develops relationships before they are needed. He acquires skills before they become essential. He positions resources before opportunities emerge. Information filtering determines strategic clarity. The Untouchable distinguishes between signal and noise with ruthless precision. He ignores data streams that create emotional reaction without actionable insight. He dismisses symbolic conflicts that consume resources while advancing no concrete objective. He focuses attention exclusively on factors that determine structural outcomes rather than temporary appearances. The cultivation of allies follows principles distinct from friendship. The Untouchable develops relationships based on mutual interest rather than emotional affinity. He creates value for strategic partners that ensures continued cooperation regardless of personal feeling. He establishes arrangements where defection carries prohibitive cost relative to benefit. Soft power consistently outperforms hard power in sustainable operation. The application of force, whether physical, financial, or organizational, creates resistance proportional to pressure applied. The exercise of influence through attraction rather than compulsion generates voluntary compliance that requires no ongoing enforcement. The strategic assessment of any human being begins with identifying their primary drivers. All humans serve something: status, security, belonging, autonomy, legacy, pleasure, power, virtue. Once the core driver is identified, behavior becomes predictable and influence becomes systematic. The Untouchable studies his targets with scientific detachment. He identifies their operating system, then provides inputs that generate outputs serving his objectives. Every human relationship involves exchange, whether acknowledged or denied. The Untouchable maintains positive balance in all significant interactions. He provides value before extracting it. He creates obligation through selective generosity. He establishes patterns of reciprocity that others follow without conscious calculation. Reputation functions as independent asset, requiring active management. The Untouchable systematically builds consistent public identity that serves strategic purposes. He ensures actions visible to multiple parties align with carefully constructed image. He recognizes that reputation, once firmly established, performs work on his behalf without further investment. Accessibility diminishes perceived value in all domains. The Untouchable maintains strategic scarcity regarding his time, attention, and presence. He does not respond to all communications. He does not attend all gatherings. He does not offer opinion on all matters. This selective engagement creates impression of value unrelated to actual quality of contribution. The deliberate creation of mystery generates power beyond actual capability. Humans fill information voids with projections that typically exceed reality. The strategic operator provides enough visible success to establish credibility while maintaining sufficient ambiguity to encourage imagination. He allows others to believe he holds cards he has not played. Strategic timing often requires allowing damaging situations to fully mature before responding. The Untouchable resists premature intervention, even when possible. He recognizes that partial problems rarely justify complete solutions. When opponents overextend, reveal themselves, and fully commit to erroneous positions, their vulnerability reaches maximum extent. The management of internal state determines external effectiveness. The Untouchable develops systems for emotional regulation independent of circumstance. He maintains physical disciplines that support psychological resilience. He creates decision frameworks that function under pressure. He establishes recovery protocols for inevitable setbacks. Ultimate power emerges from the systematic application of these principles as integrated system rather than isolated tactics. The untouchable does not simply use techniques. He embodies strategy as operating system. His every action, decision, and communication reflects unified approach to influence, position, and control. Remember this. In a world where most operate on emotion, the strategic mind always prevails. Not through superior resources, not through greater intelligence, not through moral virtue or cosmic justice. The strategist prevails through systematic decision quality that compounds, while others squander position through reactive inconsistency. The untouchable moves through a different reality, not because he sees what others cannot, but because he controls what others will not, himself.